Hello, this is Mr. Reed, and today we're going to be discussing the role of groups in America's political process. So, to do so, we're going to look at a few essential questions to guide our learning. The first question we want to look at is, how do groups impact the political process? And to do that, we're going to add ourselves two more questions. First, how might groups help the political process? And second, how might groups hurt the political process? So as we're going along, you may find it helpful to write these questions down and take your notes based on where they fit in these three questions. It'll probably be helpful for you to know what the political process is. What do we mean when we say political process? Well, to me, there are really three parts. The first part of the political process is campaigning and elections. People going around, shaking hands, kissing babies, trying to get elected to office. They're trying to get you to vote for them. That's called politics. Now, once someone's elected, generally our legislators, our senators, and our representatives, their job is to make our country run, and oftentimes they're passing bills. So if you think of the I'm Just a Bill video from Schoolhouse Rock, that's politics, because they've got to figure out what's going to be in the bill, they've got to negotiate the bill, they've got to cut deals, and all of that is politicking. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, a politician is supposed to meet the needs of you, the people. So politics involves them listening to you and perhaps trying to get your side of the story and then trying to meet your needs. All of these things together we call the political process. So the first group we're going to look at is what we call special interest groups. Now, if you're in my class recently, we read a current event article about the Farm Bill being debated in our nation's legislature, and an aspect of it was there were a seafood trade group who was trying to change the rules on catfish inspections. We use this to learn about what is an interest group. Well, an interest group is a group of people who band together with a common goal or purpose, and in this case it was a group of people who work in the seafood industry. Now, they band together because together they can pool all their resources and have more influence. Money isn't everything in this world, but in politics it can buy you a lot. It can buy you advertising. That'll help you elect officials. It'll give you money to donate to campaigns, so people you want to get elected do get elected. It may help you hire someone to help you pass laws, which we'll talk about in a second. And it can even help you make advertisements to help change public opinion. Recently in our country, we've seen a lot of that being done with the coal industry and the natural gas industry. There's a lot of advertisements out there about clean coal. Well, those are special interest groups who are trying to change public opinion about the effects of burning fossil fuels. So these interest groups, they're working together. They have to have some sort of common goal or purpose. Like I said, they might be trying to elect a certain political party. They might be trying to increase aid to the poor. They might be representing a business, like, say, the hospitals. So there's a hospital association. And they could also be, groups of outdoorsmen who are trying to get better hunting and fishing laws. All these groups exist because they realize that when they band together, they have more influence. Our American democracy is essentially based on the idea that there's a majority rule with respect to minority rights. So when you band together as a group, you look more like a majority, especially when it comes to contacting our senators and our representatives and trying to sway their opinions. If you have a group of 10,000 people, you look more like a majority than any individual writing to their senator or representative. Now, these interest groups do what we call lobbying. The term lobbying, many people believe, comes from a completely false story about President Ulysses S. Grant. That's a fun story, so I'll try to tell you anyways. As the story goes, Ulysses S. Grant enjoyed, let's say, drinking many adult beverages, and he would do so in the lobby of a hotel in Washington, D.C. as president. Now, because everyone knew that, they would go to that hotel and try to convince President Grant to see their side of the story on something, try to convince him to change certain rules or laws to help them. And once, supposedly, again, he came out of there going, oh, these darn lobbyists, because the people were always coming up to him in the lobby. And while it's a great story for American history, it's not really true. We know that because we can see the term lobbying in writing as far back as the 1830s. And so our best guess is it comes from a similar idea where people were standing in the lobby outside of Parliament in Great Britain, trying to talk to their legislators and try to change their opinions. So the idea of lobbying is a verb. Lobbying is when you're trying to change or persuade someone else's opinion, generally to your point of view. A lobbyist is a noun. It's a person working for an interest group. So these interest groups, when they pool all their resources, hopefully they have enough money now to hire someone who works for them to go convince people of their side of the story. This person might do research on bills, they might testify in front of committees, they may even go and say take your senator or representative out to dinner, buy them a nice meal, and try to have a conversation about a bill they're trying to pass. And that's where things start to get a little bit sketchy, because we're not going out at a fast food restaurant for the dollar menu. We're going to a very nice restaurant, we're buying nice food. Maybe we're even taking the senators or legislators on a trip to go investigate the issue. So the Seafood Trade Group maybe is taking the senators and representatives to Alaska to check out the seafood industry up there. Well, while that might be okay technically by some laws, it looks like they're taking them on a nice fancy trip to Alaska, and that's where things are really a gray area. Another gray area is that oftentimes these lobbyists are people who used to work in government, either as a politician or as a civil servant. So if they're a politician who recently got out of, say, the House of Representatives, they have a lot of connections in that House of Representatives that they can now call up and talk to on a first-name basis. So they've got kind of insider access to our government. As civil servants, people who used to work for the government, these people know every loophole to every law. So they're hired oftentimes by the industries to help them circumnavigate the intent of many of our laws because they know how to get around things. And again, they also have insider access in these governmental groups, like, say, the Department of Environmental Protection. So if they need something changed, they've got a buddy who they worked with for 10 years who they can call and talk to. And most of your average citizens just can't do that. The last group I want to talk about is PACs and super PACs. PAC stands for Political Action Committee. Political action committees were formed to help raise money for candidates and then direct that money to the candidates. They're essentially a fundraising arm of anyone running for office. Lately, though, things have changed. So, in a Supreme Court case called Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission in 2010, the Supreme Court ruled that campaign donations are a form of free speech, and therefore any laws that regulate how much money you can or cannot give to a campaign would be violating your free speech. You should have the right to give as much as you do. And likewise, the conclusion was made that since groups, special interest groups, corporations, unions, are all made up of people, they have the same rights as individuals. So we couldn't limit the amount of money donated by a group to an election. So between this case and a number of cases that followed right after, what we have now are the creation of what are often called super PACs, political action committees that are allowed to accept limitless donations from anyone that can be spent towards an election. That's why in the most recent presidential election, you saw so many ads that were paid for by groups like Citizens for a Better America, or Think Progress, or Americans Who Love Democracy, or Americans for Prosperity. They all have nice names, but you never really know who's behind the group and who's paying for it. And because they aren't beholden to one campaign, they can essentially say whatever they want. If the group Americans Who Love Puppies wants to say that Senator Joe Schmo hates puppies, there's really no recourse against that because it's not like they're going to get any negative publicity and they're not going to lose an election. They're an outside group. So these groups are spending vast sums of money, millions if not billions of dollars, trying to elect and defeat candidates. And that can also get a little sketchy because just like when you donate to a campaign, you're kind of expecting the person running is going to do things that you want, whether they know it or not. And when we talk about donations that involve the millions and billions of dollars, it really starts to get complicated. Because what we saw recently, for example, we had a few representatives who were Republicans and voted against, or they voted for reopening the government, for example, and they didn't want to stop the healthcare law. And because of that, immediately they had some conservative groups come out against them and say that they were going to support people running against them in their primary elections next year for the House of Representatives. So these big groups with a lot of money are, exerting that kind of influence over the people who are making our laws. Now, I want to go back to these questions we started the day with. First of all, we thought, how do groups impact the political process? If you're taking notes right now, I would think, if you don't have much, what changes come as a result of groups? What can they do to cause change in our government? The second question we're looking at is, how might groups help the political process? And to help you narrow that down even more, think about, why is banding together helpful to people? Why is making groups helpful to people in what we call democracy? Lastly, your last question to think about was, how might groups hurt the political process? So I want you to think in this: who gets left out when we're talking about politics and we're talking about large sums of money? What group of people are inevitably going to be left out? And also think, our last topic, how does money make things a little sketchy? If you can answer those questions, you will have a strong understanding of how groups impact the political process. Thank you.